So, a very good afternoon to everyone. I am Abdul Farwa. I am from the National Institute of Technology, Silchar, Assam. And today, the topic of my presentation will be rethinking Oriental conceptions of the civilized in terms of ecology from a reading of Chinese Pariah's Everything the Light Touches, there is a mistake there, sorry, and Eastern Curious, Sky is My Father. So, I essentially am a scholar of the literature field, right? So my thesis is based on novels, on fiction. And in my thesis, I mainly look at the decolonization project and how it is being carried out via literature by native writers from the Northeast, such as Janice Pariah and Eastern Curie. When I got to know of this conference, I was really happy to know that I can marry these two concepts because when the native writers such as Janice Pariah and Mr. Curie, when they write about their own communities, when they try to portray them as civilized enough without the white man's burden, ecology and ecological practices and beliefs are a very, very, prominent trope in their literatures. Right? So that is something which I wanted to delve deep into when I got to know about the theme and the scope of this conference, and I hope I'll be able to do justice to it. So, Northeast India, till date, we have a development of Northeast region ministry in the cabinet, right? It has always suggested that Northeast India is this pristine but also underdeveloped region, right? And these ideas did really come from the colonial Raj times, when the hill areas of the Northeast were cordoned off from the centers in the plains, the Assam Valley, the Brahmaputra Valley, the Surma Valley, and let's say the Bangladesh plains, right? Because the colonizers created the image of the tribals, the hill tribals, being unpredictable and barbaric. Their practices being unscientific. And that idea is something that we carry on till date. And that is something I really wanted to look at. But then if you really think about it, if we really, just use our common sense, the kind of geography, the kind of terrain that we have in those hill states, we cannot be possibly having a metro like Mumbai in the place of Shillong. It's absolutely impossible. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that it is always wrong to view these people and these places from the lens of another place or another community, right? They deserve a lens of their own. And that is what authors such as Janice Pariah and Mr. Curie are trying to give them via their fictions and beats. They are not writing history books. They do not claim to write books of anthropology, but they write fictions, and that is what we as scholars of literature study. And we try to find the tropes, and we try to study the exercise of decolonization in them. So what we really see from our study is that the history of the development, so-called development of the Northeast, has been a history of the clearance of its forests, right? And what that does is that disconnects the indigenous people from their lifestyle, but also on a deeper level from their folklore, because their beliefs, their practices are so intertwined with nature, and when you gradually lose nature, you lose that touch automatically. Their beliefs anyway had been deemed unscientific and barbaric and baseless, right? And coupled with the clearing of the forest, they have become a sort of rootless sort of a people who are trying to find what's the word that we can use here? We can say they are trying to find their identity in the definition of someone else. And in this entire situation, there are multiple angles, but ecology is such a big angle, and that is what made it all the more interesting when I was studying. So my research objectives are to inquire what traditional knowledge systems of the Khasis and the Angami-Nagas are highlighted in the primary texts. Ecological traditional knowledge systems. Secondly, to explore how these bits of knowledge of terrain and lifestyles are incorporated in and transmitted in oral folklore and performative practices, and how this sort of incorporation and transmission is portrayed in the written literature in hand, that is the two novels that I have taken. And number three, to establish the civilization of the indigenous communities of the global south, especially the Khasis and the Angami before the white man's advent. These are my methods and my methodology. My key theorists are James C. Scott and Varanasi. So James C. Scott has this beautiful idea that when an administrative regime tries to control a space, it first tries to control its nature. It first tries to, make boundaries so that it becomes easier for them to structure everything. And while doing that, it uses ideas of high modern science. It uses the word high modern science, which is precisely the Western science that is being taught in the universities, ignoring the traditional know-hows, which are equally scientific, which are equally, very, very rooted in the practices and the knowledge of the terrain of these particular areas, but those are ignored when development is planned. And Vandana Shiva, as all of us know, she says that the people of the global south, especially the women even more than the men, the people of the global south are very, very connected with nature, and she has this concept of ecofeminism as well, right? So, description of the traditional Khasi knowledge system by Janice Parriott in her novel Everything the Light Touches. There are, of course, loads and loads of descriptions of traditional Khasi knowledge systems, but the two points that I've chosen for my presentation today are as follows. Firstly, land of the commons. There is this beautiful anecdote there. There is this character called Bagit, whose grandfather was a Rambashno, which is basically a village headman or a chieftain, you can say. And the British came to the Khasi Hills and they asked him to sell a particular plot of land to them. He said, I do not have the power to do so. They asked, then what power do you have? And he said, as much as that stone lying there. So what is the point there? There is a beautiful, beautiful concept of the Khasis that we find described by Parriott in this particular episode, that land always belonged to the commons. It had no ownership, no documentation, right? People farmed in those lands by rotation, and if you left it fallow for more than 3 years, it reverted back to the commons and someone else could claim it and farm it as long as they wanted to, right? Now, this did not sit well with the British. They wanted to structure it, they wanted names and they wanted deeds and all of that so that they could sell and they could buy. But does that mean that the Khasi system was uncivilized? Definitely not. Barkett says that, after British got in their concept of ownership, now the Khasi Hills have the haves and the have-nots, someone who has the land and someone who does not, right? That brings with it corruption. That brings with it the urge to exploit the land as they want because they own it. No one can come and tell them what to do and what not to do, even if they want to, even if they want to mine deep into the land, right? But during the time when land was of the commons, there was no exploitation. Those areas are very, very rich in uranium, but the Khasis knew what not to touch air. This particular expression is found in the novel by Janice Parriott, what not to touch air. Our people knew what they needed to survive and what not to touch air. So that is my second point, that now there is like heavy uranium mining. And the problem that it creates is that the sort of terrain that the Khasi Hills has, even for something as simple as making a modern road, right? You have to cut a lot of trees. But the soil there, it needs a lot of those trees, those traditional trees, those endemic species to hold the soil and to prevent degradation of the soil, right? And to prevent landslides. And that is something the Khasi people knew even before the British brought in their schools and their missionary education, right? But after the colonizers came, after they started viewing the land just as resource, not as something to be respected, not as something that is a part of their folklore and their daily life, right? They just thought, okay, we can own this plot of land and then we can do whatever we please with it. So let's extract the uranium, right? And throughout the novel, Pariyat has described all the ill effects of the uranium mining. And the protagonist Shai, she travels from Shillong to this interior village in the Khasi Hills, and it is very beautifully portrayed how till the time she is a guest, she does not understand those problems, but when she decides to stay on longer, when she decides to make the village her own, that is when she starts realizing and she starts learning all these problems. And she is no more the ignorant city girl, right? And that representation is just beautiful. Finally, the picturization of the traditional Angami Naga knowledge system by Eastern Kire in her novel Skies by Father. The myth of man, tiger, and spirit being brothers, right? This particular myth that is shared by a lot of Naga tribes in Nagaland, that has been beautifully, that has been portrayed in the particular novel that I have taken. One character in the novel, he by mistake kills a tiger, and then he has to go through a rigorous 13-day or 15-day, rituals. He has to atone, basically. Why does he have to atone for killing a tiger? They are, in fact, people who eat meat. Then why, right? Because there is the myth of the man, tiger, and spirit being brothers at one point in time. Even their folk tales start with, expressions such as during the times when rivers and stones could speak, right? Now, this sort of a myth, of course, when we look at David Satnay's idea of myth, a myth is not a logical truth, it is a symbolic truth, which helps us understand a society's morality and reality better, right? So this myth basically just helps the Angami Nagas to be more close to nature and to respect nature and to protect nature enough so that nature can help them live their lives, right? And I don't think anything more scientific or more logical or more smart than that. Today, what we are doing with nature is definitely not helping us, right? And that becomes a joke, an irony of the sort of modern education that the colonizers brought to us. And lastly, the portrayal of chicken sacrifices. Again, a practice that the colonizers just did not understand, and many times we in 2026 don't do. But the portrayal, I'm not talking about how scientific or unscientific this practice is, I'm talking about the portrayal that Eastern Curate made of it. A character called Sid, a particular person, a priest who is appointed for that particular reason, comes to their home, does a whole ritual, then takes the chicken, then sacrifices it in the jungle, and then the person gets well. So the thing is that firstly Eastern Curate is showing that this sacrifice is working. Whether or not we understand it or not, it is working, right? And so what she's trying to say is that it is not something illogical or barbaric. And secondly, she shows it in a very structured manner. So she shows discipline. So she shows that these communities who are practicing certain XYZ ecological practices, they are not barbarians. They do not live a life of indiscipline, right? They do everything with structure, with discipline. Even their ecological practices have thought processes behind it, not something, just done at whims and fancies, right? And this portrayal shows us how, by looking at a community's ecological practices, we also understand the process of decolonization that they are going through in terms of reconstructing their tribal ethnic identities in 2026. Thank you so much. This is my conclusion, and with this, I end my presentation. This is Atul Purva signing off.